Thank you for having me. I thought today I might just regale you a little bit with the subject wine and your health. You know, I was trained as a pharmacist many, many years ago, and decided I didn't want to be in the retail business, and pursued other endeavors, and then eventually bought Haskell's, and where am I? I'm in the retail business, and I'm dispensing a medicine, albeit a little different than the one I went to pharmacy school for so long ago. But you know, wine is a very interesting thing. Wine is consumed in the home. About 80% of the production of the wine in the world is consumed right in people's homes. And wine drinking takes place in a home environment. And most of these instances, wine is consumed around a meal. So we see wine as a beverage that's to be enjoyed at home and enhance your meals. You know, away from home settings, most wine is consumed in restaurants, as you might expect. And wine is taken to enhance the food. And when you drink wine with a meal, if you have the right combination, it really goes very well. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a glass of beer with brats or something like that, but wine is really a food enhancer. And the good news is most wine consumers are moderate consumers. They only drink a few glasses on any given occasion, and they're much more aware of their consumption than drinkers of other beverages. And that's not to say I disapprove of that, I don't, because after all, I'm in the spirits business and the beer business as well. But wine drinkers follow a more moderate pattern, and they're at lower risk for overindulgence. As a matter of fact, of all the DWIs that are recorded in the United States annually, less than 2% come from the consumption of wine. So the other 98% come from spirits or beer, but not wine. And you know, one of the things, healthy people enjoy wine, and they enjoy it in moderation because it complements their meals, it improves your cooking. Believe me, it does that. I mean, I'm known as a pretty good cook, and I think it's because I put wine in almost everything. Someone once asked me, could you have wine for breakfast? I said, well, I don't know whether you'd have wine with breakfast, but it certainly wouldn't hurt to plump raisins with a little Madeira before you put them in your oatmeal. But wine is also recognized as the most sophisticated of all beverages. You know, all the different research on wine and the health have found that historically the traditional role of wine as part of family celebrations, culinary arts, and religious ceremonies make wine drinkers about the most positive and moderate consumers of all beverages. Now, I said that wine is a medicine. And well, how can you say that? Well, one of the definitions, and I remember this from my pharmacy days, is continuous use, is a definite condition of a medicine. Well, there are hieroglyphics in Egypt that are over 4,000 years old that show wine as a medicine in the royal household. And so, ergo, wine's been around for 4,000 years as a medicine. You know, wine was probably introduced by the Phoenicians a long time ago. And it's told that this story, in those days they used to carry wine cuttings in bones. And a Phoenician priest came into a town and he carried the bones of animals. And he had the bone of a lion, he had the bone of a donkey, and he had the bone of a bird. And he planted the vines. Well, it wasn't lost on those early Phoenicians. After one bottle of wine, you soared like a bird. After 2 bottles of wine, you roared like a lion. And on the 3rd bottle, you made a complete ass of yourself. You know, medieval Germans said, drink wine and you'll sleep well. Sleep well and you won't sin. Avoid sin and you'll be saved. Ergo, drink wine and be saved. Early use of wine, as I said, was used by the Egyptians. Perhaps that's why in the Judaism, wine plays such a major role, because after all, Moses was reared in the house of the Pharaoh and was accustomed to wine with their meals. And wine, you know, talk about ringing endorsements. Christ's first miracle, what was it? He turned water into wine at the marriage feast at Cana. That's a pretty ringing endorsement, in my opinion. Anyhow, the Old Testament, there's many, many remedies in the Old Testament that call for wine. Hippocrates used wine as an antiseptic dietary beverage, and he observed that new wines irritate the GI tract, white wines are diuretic, and red wines are antidiuretic. These same observations weren't made till 1,700 years later. Both Socrates, Aristotle, Plato all sang the praises of wine. Paul advised his followers, drink water no longer, but take a little wine for thy stomach's sake. Interestingly enough, the Muslim religion, which prohibits drinking and drinking of wine, however, if you read the Koran, they say in paradise, you'll find yourself in a garden of delight where you relax on golden cushions and are ministered to by beautiful maidens who will pour you fine wine. I just as soon have my wine here, just in case that isn't right. You know, through Roman times, wine was revered and aged, etc. After Roman times, in the medieval ages, the Catholic Church was the center of all healing in Western Europe, and general medicine even fell into limbo. However, a lot was done for the wine culture because wherever the monks went, they planted vineyards, and thus we have some of the greatest vineyards in all of Europe were planted by the monks in medieval times. But they used wine for healing very well. In Beaune, France, there's a marvelous hospital called the Hospice de Beaune. It was created for poor people by one of the Dukes of Burgundy. They said he created it because he made so many people poor. Probably some truth to that. But anyhow, what they gave you was a Rioboma wine a day. No wonder people like to be in that hospital. A Rioboma is about 4 bottles in a big bottle, and everybody got it. Of course, they treated, if you had a fever and a chill, they put you 2 in bed together, figuring the fever would offset the guy who had the chills. So wine was very comforting in those situations, I would think. Louis Pasteur said wine is the most complex beverage outside of a blood vessel. And it's interesting to note that Pasteur discovered 13 things about wine. Today they are up to over 900 elements in wine, and they're still discovering it. Wine contains all 13 elements necessary for life, and it's a suitable thing to drink for a man in health and a sickness, especially if you drink it in moderation, said Hippocrates. The wine is very, very nutritious. It's antibiotic, it helps the heart, it's a comfort in old age, and I'm sure we're all on the threshold of that here. And, you know, tasting wine is a very simple thing. There's a 5-step thing to tasting wine. The first thing is the color, and if the wine is clear, in other words, you can see through it, it's transparent, then it's fine. The next thing is the nose. Now, does it smell like wine? The next thing is a bouquet. Now, here, this is a little more complicated. Does it smell like Zinfandel or Pinot Noir or Cabernet Sauvignon or Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc or Pinot Grigio? Then the next thing is you taste the wine. And the last thing is the aftertaste. What kind of a taste is left in your mouth after you've swallowed the wine? And no matter whether a wine's graded on 10 points, 100 points, 50 points, 20 points, those are the 5 things. And if you'll notice, 2 of them have to do with your olfactory sense, smelling. And the reason for that is your tongue only can distinguish 4 things: sweet, sour, salt, and bitter. That's sometimes when you get a little older, things will taste real salty or everything tastes bitter. That's because some of those taste buds aren't working quite right. But the nose can distinguish over 60,000 different things. So it's a very important part of enjoying wine. And that's why you never ever want to fill a wine glass all the way up. Fill it up about 1/3 full so you can swirl that wine around in the glass a little bit and get the benefits of that olfactory sense and enjoy the wine. And that's, like I say, how wines are graded, and the 2 parts of the 5 parts are to do with your nose. And like I say, it's slanted very heavily that way. So when you have a glass of wine, don't feel bad if someone gives you a glass and it isn't filled right to the brim. You'd look like one of those old birds. You remember years ago they had those cocktail birds in a cocktail line would go in and out of water? That's, I'm afraid, what would happen if he filled your wine glass. My red nose would even be redder. But you know, I thought I would share with you some wonderful wine quotes. Plato said, "Wine is God's greatest gift to man." Confucius said, "3 cups of wine will settle anything, and a good drinking bout will turn away 1,000 cares." Ecclesiastes said, "Good wine brings gladness to the heart and cheerfulness to the mind." Now, this is something important for all of us. Up to age 40, eating well is beneficial. After age 40, drink well. And that's from the Talmud. Shakespeare said, "If I had 1,000 sons, I would teach them to forswear strong potions and stick to wine." And this is one of my favorites, was by Michelangelo. He said, "One bottle of wine works more miracles than a church full of saints." And one of the popes during the United States Depression was asked if he went along with the idea that you couldn't get wine in the United States, and he said simply, "If God didn't want you to drink wine, why would he have made it taste so good?" And there's an Italian proverb that says, "Beware of the man who doesn't drink." In youth, it's love and roses. Age brings good friends and old wine, St. Thomas More. Thomas Jefferson said, "No nation is drunken where wine is plentiful," and that's incidentally quite true. You know, the largest per capita consumers in the world are the Italians. They consume in Italy almost 90 liters per capita a year. Now that's incredible. A liter is just a little bit over a quart, so 90 quarts of wine. And you know what? They have the least heart problems of any country in Europe is in Italy. And that, like I say, it's a very healthy country, the longevity, et cetera, and they really, there's another favorite quote of mine by Oscar Wilde: "I only drink to make other people more interesting." Robert Louis Stevenson said, "Wine is bottled poetry." And Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "God made yeast to show he loves fermentation as well as vegetation." The trouble with the world, Humphrey Bogart said, is everybody's 2 drinks behind. And I love this little poem. "God in his goodness sent the grape to cheer the great and the small. Little fools drink too much. Great fools drink not at all." And I say abstinence is a wonderful thing if done in moderation. As we said a little earlier, I asked them, you know, all of these wonderful things about medicine and wine as a medicine are just remarkable. This just came out a week ago from the Mayo Clinic. It is 9 pages, and it's all on wine and your heart and how beneficial wine is for your heart. You know, the Mayo Clinic discovered not too long ago that wine had antibiotic properties about 6 years ago. Well, big deal. They finally agreed with that. They used to wash the gladiators' wounds with wine to prevent infection. So they were using wine for antibiotics back in ancient Rome 2,000 years, 2,500 years ago. So a lot of the things that they're discovering about wine today, and it is wonderful, the antibiotic properties, it does so many things that you swear aspirin wasn't any good for you, because wine will do almost everything that aspirin does for people. It is really incredible. Of course, the key is moderation, and red wine is better for you than white wine, although white wine has a lot of medicinal benefits too. But it's kind of tragic in the United States. The wine is governed here by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tax, and Firearms. You know, most countries, it's the agricultural department that takes care of the wine, but not in our country. In our country, you are prohibited, the Gallows of the world, or anybody who makes wine, the Jacksons of the world, they can't put on that bottle that wine is good for you. Now you can get it on a box of Cheerios that wine is, they're heart healthy, You can get it on Welch's grape juice that it's good for you, it's heart healthy. But you can't have it say that on wine because of federal regulations, which make no sense at all, because wine is not only proven, it's been tested for almost 4,000 years. And there's so many things, like I say, that wine does, that if I read them all off up here, you'd say, well, that's the new greatest cure-all in the entire world. And while it isn't, it is comforting to note that as you sit tonight and maybe have a meatloaf dinner with a little mashed potatoes and a little glass of red wine, that not only are you going to enjoy yourself, but you're probably doing your old ticker and your whole body a lot of good by drinking that little glass of wine. So I just would encourage you all, wine is a very, very healthful beverage. Pasteur endorsed it, Christ endorsed it at Cana, the Talmud endorses it, and Jack Farrell endorses it. Thank you for having me here today. I've enjoyed it immensely. I'm a great Burgundian, so I like Pinot Noir as my favorite varietal of grape. That doesn't mean the others aren't bad. I enjoy them all, but that happens to be my personal favorite. And from Burgundy, which is an area in France, all the reds are Pinot Noir and all the whites are Chardonnay. So that's just my personal preference. Any other questions? Yes? Well, these new ones, like the Apothic is a softer white wine. Nouveau Beaujolais is a wine like that. White Zinfandel is better for you than white wine because it's got the skin. What the real health thing they claim with wine comes from the phenols, and those are in the red wine skin. And white Zinfandel was created by the Trinchero family many years ago because they had a load of Zinfandel and didn't know how to get rid of it, so they thought they would make white Zinfandel. In other words, wine gets its color from the grape skins. So they took the grape skins away after it turned pink, and they made sure it was kind of sweet, and we're off to the races, and white Zinfandel has been enormously popular ever since then. Yes, if you're going to put wine in your refrigerator, if you just put the cork back in, it'll probably last 24 hours at the most before it starts to have deleterious effects. If you buy one of those vacuum bins, they're about $10. They come with 3 or 4 corks. You pump the air out. You can keep that wine for up to 10 days with no problem at all. So it's a very worthwhile investment to get one of those. They're called vacuum bins, and they pump the air out. Yes. The natural enemy of wine is light and vibration. So if you put that wine in a cellar, dark room, etc., it'll last a long time. Generally, whites don't last as long as reds. Sweet wines will last a lot longer than dry wines, but wine is a remarkable thing. I went down in my cellar once, I found a bottle of wine that was marked 89 cents, and it was a 1959 wine from France. And I thought to myself, oh, maybe I was making coq au vin, which is chicken cooked in wine. Maybe I'll use this bottle of wine. I thought it might not even be any good for that. So I opened it up. It was delicious. It was 89 cents. I drank that whole bottle, savored every bit of it, and it sat in my cellar in Kenwood for at least 35 years before I got around to opening that dusty old 89-cent bottle of wine, which turned out to be spectacular. So wine always surprises you, but most of the wine in the entire world is drunk within a year, year and a half of when it was made. So age on wine and all that isn't that important or something you have to worry about very much because most people drink wine the year it's made. That isn't a contest anymore. It used to be. You know, California wines had established their name in the world, and they were like an obnoxious teenager. Notice me, notice me, notice me, I'm here, I'm here. Well, now they've been noticed, and they're improving by quantum leap. Wines are different all over the world. I did a thing at the ophthalmology department Saturday night at the University of Minnesota, and we compared 16 different wines. And as I told them then, we aren't here to really compare which is better. They're just both very different. If you have a Sauvignon Blanc from California and a Sancerre from France, it's the same grape type, but they're totally different wine, and they both give you a lot of pleasure. And I like them both, but the idea is it's just different. We're not in a competition in the world of wine anymore, I think. You know, every country is making some very good wines. You know, Argentina never exported wine till a few years ago. Now almost everybody in the room has probably heard of Malbec, and it's a red wine that's a blended grape in Bordeaux, but in Argentina, it's their principal red grape type. And the wine, incidentally, is very good, particularly with barbecue sauce. So, yes. But certainly if you had a $5 bottle of wine, a $50 bottle of wine, the $50 bottle of wine in 99% of the time would be better than the $5 bottle of wine. But you know, there's an old Latin, I don't remember much Latin, even though I had 4 years of it. De gustibus non disputanum est. In matters of taste, there can be no dispute. If you like mustard on your hot dog and I like ketchup, no one's ever going to convince us the other one is right. And that's the same thing with wines. You had a question, sir.
How about aerating wine?
It always benefits from aerating. When you decant a bottle of wine, you're improving it. You're adding air to it. The wine's been bottled up in that bottle for a while, and you pour it into a pitcher or a flagon or a flask, and that aerates the wine. And all wine benefits from aeration. Unless, I make one caveat, unless it's a real old bottle of wine, 40, 50 years old, and sometimes those have to be decanted very, very carefully because there's sediment in it and it'll mix up, etc. But 99% of the wine in the world benefits. Red, white, rosé, they all benefit from aeration. Yes, sir. Well, I think right now the best place to get red wine from is the Rhone Valley in France. You can get a bottle of wine there for $10 that'll rival $100 bottles in other parts of the world. But there's something new, and Spanish wine is a great value today. So many of that wines that used to be plunk, and now they've got a little money, they've got some stainless steel barrels, they can afford better things. And I'm astonished, you can buy a bottle of Spanish wine for well under 10 bucks, and you'll be delighted with it. There's some real great bargains out there from Spain, from Italy, from the Rhone Valley in France, that have held their value very nicely. And today, you know, the euro is now $1.06. It wasn't 6 months ago, it was $1.38. So you can buy more with the dollar today, which means the wine prices will start coming down a bit for imported wines. That doesn't affect the wines from Australia, New Zealand, South America, because they're all pegged to the US dollar. Well, you never want to mix sleeping pills with wine. That's why your doctor gave you all the. Now, if you want to have a glass of wine and sleep 5 hours and then have another glass of wine, I'm sure the doctor would be in favor of that too. But you just don't mix sleeping pills with wine, or for that matter, any alcohol. The combination could be deadly. You have to be very, very careful with sleeping pills and wine. Well, you have a headache if you wake up with a lot of beer in your system too, or whiskey. The idea is don't have so much and you won't have a headache. And you know, another thing, people will tell me all the time, I was in Europe and I drank wine every day and I never had a headache. If I did that here, I can't do that here. Yes, you can. You're on vacation. You don't, here you have guilt. Guilt gives more headaches than anything else. I had a couple glasses and I said something I shouldn't have, or I did something I shouldn't. That's giving you a headache more than the wine, trust me. Well, nothing changed in Australia, believe me. What happened was so many other parts of the world were making better wine, and Australia was filling the pipeline with something called yellowtail, millions and millions of cases of it, and the quality kept going this way with yellowtail. I'd urge you to try the Australian wines again, but steer away from yellowtail. You will be delighted, because they do make great wines in Australia. Well, the question is, are there any Minnesota wines I'd recommend? Yes, they're loving. I mean, I love Minnesota. I love everything we do in this state. We don't make very good wine, unfortunately. And you know, that's hard to tell somebody. It's like somebody asks me, well, you like my boy here? And I can't say, well, no, I'll give your monkey a banana and we'll talk about your boy later. But you can't do that. You know, it's a labor of love and they try so hard. You can't help but admire that. But if you don't ever expect to have a wonderful, wonderful bottle of wine from Minnesota, we don't have enough sunshine days. Oh, I take that back, we do. But we get half of them in February or March where they don't do grapes any good at all. We just are in too cold an area to really make good wine. And there's a lot of people who make wine here who bring grapes in from California and Oregon, etc. And there's some good wines out there that are Minnesota. But on the whole, I would say go elsewhere to look for good wines and bargain wine. Fun to have them, particularly fun to share them with someone from out of state, something like that. We used to send a whole bunch of wines when Dave Durenberger was a senator. That's what he gave all the other 50. That's probably why they chastised him. He gave the other 100 senators a bottle of Minnesota wine. There's a great vineyard if you ever want to go to down in Hastings called the David Bailey Vineyard, Alexis Bailey Vineyard. And I'll tell you, they've signed, you drive into it, says where the grapes suffer. And of course, boy, do they ever in our climate. And but they work so hard and they make some lovely wines, and they have one called Ratafia, which is an orange flavored kind of wine. It's really a dessert liqueur more than wine, but it's awfully good. But anyhow, it's worth a trip down there in the fall to Hastings to go to the Bailey Vineyards because it's very pretty.